The prestigious halls of the Pan-Galactic Institute of Evolutionary Studies buzz with excitement, a level usually reserved for discovering a new spacefaring civilization or an exceptionally good cafeteria day. Today's xenoanthropology conference had drawn a record-breaking crowd, though not for the reasons anyone might have expected. The usual discussions on convergent evolution and predator-prey relationships had been pushed aside in favor of what the academic community was calling the Earth question. The main amphitheater, designed to accommodate 12 different atmospheric requirements and 27 distinct forms of sensory perception, was packed to capacity. Distinguished researchers from across the galaxy perched, floated, or otherwise arranged themselves in various states of anticipation. Even the crystalline beings from Real 7, notorious for their stoic demeanor and general disregard for organic matters, had positioned their facets at what could only be described as an intrigue angle. At the center of the stage, surrounded by holographic displays and enough computing power to calculate the trajectory of a small moon, stood Professor Zix for 27 Beta. Their tentacles twitched with barely contained excitement, the kind that only centuries of academic research could produce. Their chromatophores cycled through shades of blue, a signal in their species that indicated either profound scientific revelation or severe indigestion. "Colleagues," the professor began, their voice modulator adjusted to accommodate the varied auditory ranges present, "we have been asking the wrong questions about human evolution for the past 3 centuries. We've been so focused on understanding how humans became the dominant species on their planet that we failed to notice the most glaring anomaly in their evolutionary history. A ripple of electromagnetic disturbances swept through the audience as silicon-based life forms exchanged nervous data packets. The methane breathers in the upper gallery released anxious bubbles that popped with soft, rhythmic pings. Our recent comprehensive analysis of Earth's fossil record, combined with genetic mapping and temporal resonance scanning, has revealed something unprecedented." The professor paused, either for dramatic effect or because their speech synthesizer needed a moment to cool down. Humans are the only known species in the galaxy that evolved without natural predators. The silence that followed was so profound that one could hear the quantum fluctuations in the room's background radiation. Then, predictably, chaos erupted. A Venusian philosopher's plasma field destabilized in shock, momentarily shorting out the translation matrix. 3 members of the Centaurian Science Council began vibrating at frequencies typically associated with extreme skepticism or mild panic. "Impossible!" shouted an agitated cloud of sentient gas from the Horsehead Nebula. "Every species evolves in response to predatory pressure. It's fundamental to the development of intelligence. That's precisely what makes this discovery so remarkable," Professor Zix continued, their tentacles undulating in what xenobiologists recognized as the academic equivalent of barely contained glee. "We've analyzed every major extinction event and every evolutionary branch point in human development. Where other species faced natural selection through predation, humans simply didn't." The holographic displays flickered to life, revealing a timeline of Earth's evolutionary history. It looked as if someone had taken a perfectly reasonable evolutionary tree and allowed a quantum computer with a sense of humor to rearrange it. Where other species showed clear patterns of predator-prey coevolution, the human lineage stood apart, developing in ways that defied conventional evolutionary theory. "But what about the large carnivores?" asked a collective consciousness from Alpha Centauri, its 1,000 voices harmonizing in confusion. "The fossil record clearly shows the existence of prehistoric predators." "Ah!" The professor's chromatophores shifted to a shade of purple, indicating academic satisfaction mixed with mild amusement. "That's where it gets interesting. While Earth certainly had its share of impressive carnivores, none of them specifically evolved to hunt proto-humans. In fact, the evidence suggests that humans were remarkably adept at avoiding, outsmarting, or simply ignoring potential predators altogether. A graduate student from Mars, their exoskeleton vibrating with nervous energy, raised an appendage. "But surely this violates the fundamental principles of evolutionary dynamics." "It absolutely does." Professor Zix replied with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for discovering that everything you know about your field is wonderfully, gloriously wrong. And that's just the beginning of the anomalies we've uncovered. The professor's tentacles curled around a data crystal, lifting it to catch the light. Our analysis shows that while other species develop specific adaptations to avoid predation, camouflage, armor, speed, or venom, humans instead develop something far more peculiar. They became exceptionally skilled at turning absolutely anything into a tool or weapon. The holographic display shifted to show various human artifacts throughout history, from simple stone tools to nuclear submarines. They didn't evolve natural weapons or defenses. They didn't need to. Instead, they developed the ability to look at literally any object in their environment and think, I wonder if I could use this to solve my problems. A collective murmur rippled through the audience as the implications began to sink in. Some of the more sensitive telepaths had to activate their psychic dampeners to avoid being overwhelmed by the wave of academic excitement and existential dread sweeping through the room. But that's not even the most bizarre part. Professor Zix continued, their chromatophores now pulsing with what could only be described as academic glee. Our research suggests that instead of being shaped by predatory pressure, humans essentially became their own evolutionary catalysts. They created their own selection pressures through social interaction, tool use, and what appears to be an almost pathological desire to poke dangerous things with sticks just to see what happens. The professor's final statement hung in the air like a mathematical proof, suggesting the universe had a sense of humor after all. The implications were clear. Humanity hadn't just broken the rules of evolution. They had apparently never bothered to read them in the first place. The discovery that sent shockwaves through the xenoarchaeological community did not come from some grand expedition or sophisticated temporal analysis, but from a rather embarrassing oversight in the classification of Earth's geological records. A junior researcher, fresh from their seventh metamorphosis, had been tasked with the mind-numbingly tedious job of recategorizing prehistoric dental records when they noticed something generations of scientists had somehow missed. You're telling me, drawled the chief archaeologist of the Galactic Scientific Council, their crystalline form vibrating with barely contained skepticism, that we overlooked this for 3,000 years because nobody bothered to check the teeth. The research team assembled in the Ancient Earth Studies Department shifted uncomfortably. Several of them had evolved beyond the need for physical forms, but they still managed to look embarrassed as pure energy states. Well, responded the junior researcher, their bioluminescent patches glowing in what their species considered a nervous blush. When you put it that way, it does sound rather unfortunate. The holographic display between them showed thousands of fossil records, each meticulously cataloged and cross-referenced. But it was the gaps in the data that told the real story, or rather, the complete lack of certain expected gaps. In every other predator-prey evolutionary relationship we've studied, the researcher continued, gaining confidence, we see clear evidence of an arms race. Predator develops bigger teeth. Prey develops thicker armor. Predator gets faster. Prey develops better camouflage. It's the cosmic dance of evolution we've observed on every inhabited world in the galaxy. A senior analyst, their quantum consciousness spread across several dimensions, coalesced briefly to interject. But not on Earth. Not for humans. No, the junior researcher confirmed, zooming in on various fossil records. Humans just looked at their environment and decided to change the rules. With each leap forward, the surrounding ecosystem didn't just change naturally. It was reshaped by deliberate human intervention. They altered landscapes, domesticated species, and created artificial selection pressures they controlled entirely. It's as if they looked at natural selection and decided it wasn't moving fast enough, the researcher explained. The director's cybernetic systems whirred into emergency cooling protocols. But what about predator-prey coevolution? The fundamental drives that shape all life. The plasma being condensed into what might have been a shrug. Apparently, humans missed that memo. Instead of developing better defenses, they developed abstract thought. Instead of evolving night vision, they invented fire. Instead of becoming faster or stronger, They created food storage and complex societies. The quantum physicist probability field pulsed with revelation. They turned their entire species into a technological innovation engine. Instead of waiting for evolution to solve their problems, they just solved them themselves. The display flickered to a final dataset, a timeline of problem-solving approaches across species. Others adapted gradually over millions of years. Humans, by contrast, surged forward in sharp, unpredictable bursts, each coinciding with a technological or social breakthrough. So, the director said slowly as their system stabilized, what you're telling me is that humans looked at millions of years of evolutionary precedent and decided to take a shortcut. More like they built their own highway, the plasma being replied. And then they paved it with fire, tools, and an apparently infinite capacity for looking at lethal situations and thinking, I bet I can fix this. The Special Research Unit for Peculiar Evolutionary Developments, or SRUPD, a name that caused no small amusement among human delegates, had commandeered an entire wing of the Galactic Institute. Holographic displays lined the walls, interwoven with quantum probability matrices and thousands of sticky notes from various dimensions. The lead investigator, a hyper-intelligent shade of blue from the chromatic nebula, was experiencing what their species called a perception crisis, the equivalent of a human migraine, but with more existential dread. The numbers don't make sense, they groaned, their wavelength fluctuating wildly. We've run the simulations 10,000 times, and every single one suggests that humans should have gone extinct at least 7 times. A multidimensional mathematician, whose form existed primarily in theoretical space, briefly manifested. Perhaps we're missing a crucial variable, some hidden factor that protected them. That's just it, the investigator replied, shifting toward ultraviolet in frustration. We're not missing anything. We've accounted for every environmental factor, every predator, every extinction event. The humans just kept going. The display highlighted a particularly baffling period, 2 million years ago. By all calculations, early humans should have perished. Instead, their timeline showed innovation after innovation, each one more improbable than the last. Look at this. The investigator's color deepened to an impossible shade of blue. When faced with larger predators, most species evolved better defenses or retreated to safer habitats. Humans? They invented ranged weapons and started wearing their predators as clothing. A xenobiologist composed a living crystal vibrated in fascination. But surely there were failures? Developmental dead ends. Oh, plenty, the investigator admitted, their wavelength rippling in what might have been a smirk. But here's the bizarre part. Humans didn't just survive their failures. They learned from them. They developed something unprecedented in evolutionary history, a way to artificially transmit survival strategies. The holographic display shifted, showing cave paintings, written languages, and digital archives. Each milestone marked a fundamental shift in how humans processed environmental challenges. They invented culture, mused the mathematician, a non-genetic method of inheritance that bypasses natural selection. Exactly, the investigator brightened. While other species were solving immediate survival problems, humans were sitting around their fires, looking at the stars, and wondering what else might be possible. A temporal analyst materialized, their form flickering between past and future states. We detected something even stranger. Humans didn't just adapt to their environment. They adapted faster than their environment could adapt to them. The display showed Earth's shifting climate, predator populations, and other environmental changes. Where other species took millennia to adjust, humans did it in mere generations. Too cold? Fire and clothing. Too hot? Shelters and cooling systems. Predators? Weapons, then walls, then cities. It's like they treated evolution as a suggestion rather than a rule, the probability specialist observed. We ran alternative evolutionary paths, the investigator added. In every single probability stream, humans should have either developed natural defenses or gone extinct. Instead, they developed something far more dangerous: imagination, The display zoomed out, showcasing humanity's technological progression. It didn't resemble traditional evolution. It looked like someone had taken Moore's law and applied it to an entire species. They didn't just break evolution's rules, the temporal analyst murmured. They rewrote the rulebook, then broke those rules too. The assembled researchers stared at the data, struggling to grasp the full implications. While other intelligent species followed predictable paths, human solutions seemed to come out of nowhere, combining elements in ways that defied conventional logic. They don't adapt to limitations, the investigator marveled. They refuse to accept that limitations exist. The mathematician's form rippled. They evolved without predators. Yes, but more importantly, they evolved without accepting constraints. Every time they encountered a natural limit, they treated it as a challenge rather than a boundary. The investigator pulsed with profound revelation. They didn't just evolve without predators. They outgrew evolution itself. The emergency session of the Galactic Scientific Council was convened with all the gravity of a neutron star collapse. The chamber, designed to accommodate representatives from every known spacefaring civilization, hummed with tension. The high theorist of evolutionary sciences, a being composed of pure mathematical equations given sentience through an improbable quantum accident, materialized in the center. Their equations flickered erratically, prime numbers visibly misaligned. Distinguished colleagues, they began, their voice resonating through both physical and theoretical space. We have discovered something about human evolution that defies not just biology, but the fundamental laws of probability itself. The holographic displays sprang to life, filled with data streams and evolutionary models. To the untrained eye, it looked like every evolutionary theory in history had been run through a quantum shredder. Our latest calculations reveal something impossible, the high theorist continued. The probability of humans evolving as they did, without natural predators shaping their development, is not just unlikely, it is mathematically impossible. A stunned silence fell over the chamber. We have considered every environmental factor, every genetic sequence, every conceivable event. The numbers are unambiguous. Humans should not exist as they do. The display shifted, showing humanity's inexplicable trajectory. They didn't just adapt to their world. They adapted their world to themselves. The high theorist equations shimmered with what could only be described as awe. Humans aren't just an evolutionary anomaly. They are an evolutionary singularity. Natural selection was obsolete the moment they decided to take control of their own destiny. A long pause followed. Then a senior researcher, their multidimensional form twisting in amusement, finally spoke. Well, that certainly explains why humans are the only species who respond to warnings about dangerous alien life with. But can we keep it as a pet?